In 1883, in the Khutor of Kozyurin, Salsk district of the Don Host Oblast, a boy was born into a simple peasant family, destined to become a legend. Semyon Mikhailovich Budyonny came into the world in a land where the very earth breathed military tradition. Although his family did not belong to the Cossacks, the harsh daily life and heavy peasant labor from an early age hardened the character of the future marshal. His father worked as a farmhand for wealthy Cossacks, and little Semyon soon learned the value of bread earned with calloused hands. At 8 years old, he was already working as a cowherd, and then as a shepherd, spending long days in the steppe alone with nature and his thoughts. This life taught him patience, observation, and the ability to make decisions. Horses held a special place in young Budyonny's life. A natural inclination towards these noble animals manifested itself from childhood and grew into a true passion. He could spend hours observing herds, studying the habits of horses, their characters. This love determined his future destiny. In 1903, 20-year-old Semyon was called up for military service in the Primorsky Dragoon Regiment. Here, his natural talent for handling horses was noticed by his commanders, and soon Budyonny was sent to St. Petersburg to the Officer Cavalry School, where he became a riding instructor. Years of service in the Tsarist army became for Semyon Budyonny a true school of life and military art. Starting as a private dragoon, he quickly proved himself not only as an excellent horseman, but also as a disciplined, quick-witted soldier. At the Officer Cavalry School, Budyonny honed his skills, studying the intricacies of horsemanship and trick riding. His ability to find common ground with even the most unruly horses bordered on true talent. Instructors noted that in Budyonny's hands, even the most recalcitrant horses became obedient, as if sensing in him a natural rider. However, fate had serious trials in store for the young dragoon. With the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, Budyonny went to the front as part of the 5th Dragoon Regiment. The war showed him the true face of the Tsarist army, with its rigid class hierarchy, the incompetence of many noble officers, and the difficult situation of common soldiers. Despite this, Semyon Mikhailovich proved himself a brave warrior, earning 4 St. George's Crosses and 4 medals, a full set of George's Knight Awards. His exploits on the battlefields did not go unnoticed. He personally captured German officers, carried out audacious raids behind enemy lines, and led comrades out of encirclement. By the end of the war, Budyonny had risen to the rank of senior non-commissioned officer, which, for a man of his origin, was the limit of a career in the Tsarist army. The February Revolution of 1917 found Budyonny on the Caucasian front. News of the overthrow of the autocracy stirred up the soldier masses. In the regiment where Semyon Mikhailovich served, a soldiers' committee was created, to which he was elected deputy chairman. It was here that his organizational skills and ability to persuade people became apparent. In the autumn of the same year, when the army began to fall apart, Budyonny returned to the Don with a group of cavalrymen. It was a time of great upheaval, when everyone made their choice. For Budyonny, a man from a peasant background, this choice was predetermined by his entire previous life. Bolshevik slogans about land for peasants, about the equality of all classes, resonated in his soul. In February 1918, Budyonny organized a mounted detachment of former frontline soldiers to fight the white Cossack formations of Ataman Kaledin. This small detachment became the nucleus of the future legendary First Cavalry Army. Budyonny's talent as an organizer fully manifested itself. He knew how to approach each fighter, inspire by personal example, and create an atmosphere of combat brotherhood. His detachment grew rapidly, replenished by volunteers from local peasants and frontline soldiers. In the summer of 1918, Budyonny's detachment joined the Red Army, becoming a cavalry regiment. Soon, Semyon Mikhailovich was appointed commander of a cavalry brigade, and then a division. In these positions, he proved himself a talented tactician, masterfully using the strengths of the cavalry: mobility, surprise, and the ability to strike at the enemy's flanks and rear. His fighters adored their commander, who was always in the forefront of attacks, setting an example of personal bravery. In the autumn of 1919, a force appeared on the map of the Civil War that was destined to change the course of history. The First Cavalry Army was not born out of nowhere. It was preceded by a long path of establishment of cavalry units under the leadership of Semyon Budyonny. It all began with a small detachment created in February 1918. Gradually, the detachment grew into a regiment, a brigade, a division, and finally, a cavalry corps. On November 17, 1919, the Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic made the historic decision to create the First Cavalry Army, and Budyonny was appointed its commander. This was a recognition of his outstanding organizational abilities and military talent. What made Budyonny such an exceptional organizer? First and foremost, his deep understanding of the psychology of a cavalryman. A peasant by origin, who rose from a private to an army commander, he spoke to the Red Army soldiers in their own language, knew their needs, fears, and aspirations. Unlike many commanders, Semyon Mikhailovich did not isolate himself from ordinary soldiers, lived the same life, shared all the hardships of campaign life with them. His authority was built not on fear, but on respect and trust. Budyonny possessed a rare gift for finding and attracting talented people. He gathered around him a galaxy of brilliant commanders: Voroshilov, Timoshenko, Gorodovikov, Apanasenko. Many of them later became outstanding military leaders. At the same time, Semyon Mikhailovich was not afraid of strong personalities in his entourage, could listen to their opinions, creating an atmosphere of collective creativity. Budyonny paid special attention to the army's structure. The First Cavalry was not just an accumulation of cavalry units. It was a well-organized mechanism that included cavalry divisions, artillery, armored trains, armored vehicles, air detachments, and even tanks. Budyonny intuitively understood the importance of interaction between different branches of service long before it became a generally accepted military doctrine. He created a mobile army unique for its time, capable not only of delivering swift blows, but also of solving strategic tasks. Discipline in the cavalry army was ironclad, but at the same time, the revolutionary spirit and initiative were preserved. Budyonny knew how to find a balance between strictness and freedom of action, which allowed his commanders to show a creative approach in battle. The army commander personally knew many soldiers, remembered their feats and misdeeds, could distinguish a brave man from a coward. This created a special atmosphere in the army, where everyone felt part of a large family. The most important element of Budyonny's organizational talent was his ability to provide the army with everything necessary. In conditions of acute resource scarcity, he organized the work of rear services, repair shops, and hospitals. Special attention was paid to horses, the main strike force of the cavalry. Budyonny personally monitored the condition of the horse stock, organized a system of replenishment and veterinary services. Thanks to this, the First Cavalry maintained its combat readiness even in the most difficult conditions. Under Budyonny's leadership, the First Cavalry Army became not just a military formation, but also a forge of personnel for the future mechanized units of the Red Army. Many principles laid down in the organization of the cavalry army were later used in the creation of tank corps and armies. Thus, the experience of cavalry raids was transformed into the theory of deep operations, which became the basis of Soviet military doctrine. Semyon Budyonny's military art was formed at the juncture of eras, when old methods of warfare gave way to new ones. His genius as a commander lay in his ability to combine traditional cavalry techniques with revolutionary tactical innovations. At the heart of Budyonny's military style was a deep understanding of the essence of cavalry as a striking force, capable of solving not only tactical but also operational strategic tasks. The key element of the First Cavalry Army's tactics was deep raids behind enemy lines. Budyonny transformed cavalry from an auxiliary branch of service into the main striking force. His cavalry did not just attack. It broke through the front, smashed headquarters, communication nodes, artillery positions, sowing panic and disorganization in the enemy's ranks. The famous raid on Taganrog in December 1919 became a classic of military art. Then the cavalrymen, having traveled more than 100 kilometers behind Denikin's lines, captured the most important port, disrupting the supply of the White armies and forcing them to retreat. A distinctive feature of Budyonny's commanding talent was his ability to choose the direction of the main strike. He possessed a rare intuition for weaknesses in the enemy's defenses. Semyon Mikhailovich did not disperse forces, but concentrated them on a narrow sector, achieving decisive superiority. At the same time, he skillfully used the terrain, weather conditions, and time of day to achieve surprise. His attacks often occurred at dawn, in fog or bad weather when the enemy lost vigilance. Budyonny developed and implemented a new tactic of cavalry combat, different from classical cavalry attacks. Instead of frontal strikes in close formation, fraught with heavy losses when encountering machine guns, the cavalrymen acted more flexibly. They attacked in a lava formation, a skirmish line that allowed maneuvering on the battlefield and reducing losses from enemy fire. At the same time, Budyonny skillfully combined cavalry attacks with the actions of dismounted cavalrymen, turning riders into infantry where it was necessary. Also innovative was Budyonny's use of artillery in cavalry operations. Contrary to the widespread opinion about the incompatibility of heavy guns with mobile cavalry, he included light artillery batteries in his formations. These guns moved with the cavalry, providing fire support and helping to overcome fortified enemy positions. The army commander paid special attention to reconnaissance. Budyonny understood that the success of an operation largely depended on the accuracy of information about the enemy. Cavalry patrols, operating ahead of the main forces, collected information about the location of enemy units, their numbers, and armament. Often Budyonny himself went on reconnaissance, personally studying the terrain and enemy positions. This allowed him to make informed decisions and avoid unpleasant surprises. An important component of Budyonny military art was his ability to interact with other branches of service. The First Cavalry Army never acted in isolation. Its operations were always part of a general plan developed by the High Command. Budyonny maintained close contact with neighboring armies, coordinating his actions with infantry units. This allowed achieving the maximum effect from cavalry strikes and developing the success achieved. Semyon Mikhailovich was a master of maneuver. He knew how to quickly transfer large masses of cavalry from one sector of the front to another, appearing where he was least expected. Swiftness and surprise became the calling card of the First Cavalry Army. The enemy could never be sure where and when the Budyonny's men would strike. This unpredictability had not only tactical but also psychological significance, demoralizing the enemy. Budyonny perfectly understood the importance of the moral factor in combat. He knew how to inspire fighters by personal example, to ignite their hearts before an attack. His famous mustache, colorful appearance, and simplicity in dealing with ordinary Red Army soldiers created the image of a national hero whom people followed into fire and water. At the same time, Semyon Mikhailovich never sent his men to certain death, carefully preparing each operation, striving to minimize losses. Budyonny's military art did not remain unchanged. He constantly learned, analyzed combat experience, and improved tactics. From simple cavalry attacks, he moved to complex operations involving various branches of service. This allowed the First Cavalry Army to act successfully even when the enemy adapted to its tactics and tried to find an antidote to cavalry raids. The summer of 1919 became a turning point in the Civil War. General Denikin's army, advancing from the south, posed a mortal threat to the young Soviet Republic. White troops rapidly pushed towards Moscow, having captured Kharkov, Tsaritsyn, and other key cities. At this critical moment, Budyonny's cavalry corps, transformed in November into the First Cavalry Army, played a decisive role in turning the tide. The Budyonovtsi's decisive blow struck at the junction of the enemy's volunteer and Don armies. It was here, in the vicinity of Voronezh and Kastornoye, that one of the most dramatic battles of the Civil War unfolded. The Konarmaitsi broke through the White Front and, developing their success, rushed into the rear of Denikin's troops. The maneuverability of the Red Cavalry allowed it to deliver lightning-fast strikes where they were least expected. Budyonny's military talent was particularly evident in the Yegorlik operation in February-March of 1920. The Caucasian army of General Wrangel, opposing him, included elite units of White Cavalry, Kuban and Don Cossack formations. In fierce battles near the stanitsa of Yegorlikskaya, the Budyonovtsi broke the enemy's resistance. This victory had strategic significance. The Whites lost the initiative on the southern front and were forced to retreat to the Black Sea coast. The Konarmaitsi showed incredible resilience in the battles for Rostov-on-Don. The city changed hands several times. Budyonny skillfully maneuvered his forces, concentrating them in the direction of the main attack. His tactics, deep raids into the enemy's rear, disorganized the White defense, disrupted their communications and supply. One of the most audacious maneuvers of the First Cavalry was the legendary raid on Taganrog in December of 1919. Having covered over 100 kilometers across snow-covered steppes in a matter of days, the Konarmaitsi suddenly burst into the city where Denikin's headquarters was located. The White command barely managed to evacuate. This raid not only had military significance, but also produced a huge psychological effect, undermining the enemy's morale. In the spring of 1920, the First Cavalry was transferred to the Polish front. In battles with Pilsudski's troops, the Budyonovtsi again showed miracles of bravery and military skill. The breakthrough of the Polish front in June allowed the Red Army to launch an offensive on Lviv and Warsaw. The Konarmaitsi rapidly advanced, crushing the enemy in numerous clashes. The soldiers of the First Cavalry covered themselves with unfading glory in battles with the White Poles near Rivne and Dubno. Here, Budyonny's talent as a master of maneuver was fully revealed. His cavalry, like a fiery whirlwind, swept through the enemy's rear, sowing panic and destruction. However, the war with Poland ended in failure for Soviet Russia. The First Cavalry, pushed far ahead, found itself cut off from the main forces and was forced to fight its way out of encirclement. The spring of 1920 opened a new chapter in the history of the First Cavalry Army. The Soviet-Polish War, which flared up on the western borders of the young republic, demanded a regrouping of forces. After the defeat of Denikin and Wrangel in the southern direction, the cavalrymen received a new order to transfer the main forces to the Polish front. On May 12th, the First Cavalry Army, under the command of Budyonny, set out on a march to cover more than 800 kilometers and reach the new theater of operations. This forced march, accomplished in the shortest possible time, already in itself became a testament to the highest organization and mobility of Budyonny's units. By early June, the cavalrymen concentrated in the Uman region, ready for decisive action. Polish troops, relying on Entente support, had by then deeply invaded the territory of Ukraine and Belarus. Kiev had been captured, and the situation demanded an immediate counterattack. The Red Army High Command placed special hopes on the First Cavalry, which was to play the role of a battering ram capable of breaking through enemy defenses. On June 5, 1920, Budyonny received orders to break through the enemy front at the junction of the Polish 3rd and 6th Armies. This sector was chosen not by chance. Here lay the border between the two groupings, which created certain difficulties in the interaction of enemy forces. Semyon Mikhailovich, as always, meticulously prepared for the operation. Reconnaissance reported on the location of Polish units, their strength, and armament. Budyonny personally went on reconnaissance, studying the terrain and choosing the direction of the main attack. The cavalrymen attacked suddenly and swiftly. Polish units, not expecting such a powerful onslaught, could not hold the defense. The First Cavalry literally tore through the enemy front, creating a breach several tens of kilometers wide. Cavalry divisions rushed into the resulting breakthrough, developing the success and advancing deep into the enemy's rear. This breakthrough marked the beginning of the famous Zhytomyr raid, which entered military history textbooks as an example of a swift cavalry operation. In 2 weeks, the cavalrymen advanced 120 kilometers deep into Polish positions, liberated Zhytomyr, Berdychev, and other cities. The Polish command was forced to hastily withdraw troops, fearing encirclement. The end of the Polish campaign opened a new chapter in Semyon Budyonny's military career. An era of relative peace dawned as the main fronts of the Civil War fell silent, and the Red Army faced different tasks. Military art did not stand still. The experience of the World War and the Civil War demanded re-evaluation, and technical progress opened new possibilities for the armed forces. Under these circumstances, Budyonny had to prove that he was not just a dashing cavalry commander, but a military leader capable of strategic thinking and keeping pace with the times. In 1921, Semyon Mikhailovich was appointed Inspector of Cavalry of the Red Army. This position allowed him to apply the vast experience accumulated during his years commanding the First Cavalry Army to the development of all cavalry units in the country. Budyonny perfectly understood that the era of purely horse armies was fading into the past, but he was convinced that, if used correctly, cavalry would retain its significance as a branch of service for a long time to come. During this period, Budyonny paid particular attention to the training of cavalry commanders. At his initiative, special advanced training courses for commanding officers were established, where officers studied not only traditional issues of cavalry combat, but also interaction with artillery, armored units, and aviation. Semyon Mikhailovich insisted that a modern cavalry commander must think comprehensively, seeing the battlefield as a whole. This was an innovative approach that anticipated the concept of combined arms combat. The 1920s became a time of active military reforms. Budyonny, who was a member of the Revolutionary Military Council of the USSR, took direct part in shaping the new military doctrine. He supported Mikhail Frunze's ideas of creating a unified military system, including a regular army, territorial formations, and universal military training of the population. At the same time, Semyon Mikhailovich advocated for the need to maintain a strong cavalry as a mobile means of developing success in offensive operations. One of Budyonny's most important contributions to the development of Soviet military thought was his participation in the elaboration of the theory of deep operation. Drawing on the experience of the First Cavalry Army's raids, he, along with Tukhachevsky, Triandafilov, and other military theorists, created the concept of breaking through enemy defenses to their full depth using tank, mechanized, and cavalry formations. This theory, ahead of its time, formed the basis of Soviet military doctrine and subsequently brilliantly proved its effectiveness during the Great Patriotic War. Understanding the inevitability of army mechanization, Budyonny actively supported the creation of the first Soviet tank units. He saw tanks as the natural evolution of cavalry, equally mobile, but a much more powerful means of breakthrough and developing success. At his initiative, mechanized units equipped with armored vehicles and light tanks began to be formed within cavalry formations. This was the beginning of the transformation of traditional cavalry into modern mobile formations. In the 1930s, Budyonny headed the Moscow Military District, one of the key ones in the country's defense system. In this post, he continued to develop ideas of interaction between various branches of service, paying special attention to exercises that practiced joint actions of infantry, cavalry, tanks, and aviation. These exercises became a proving ground for testing new tactical methods and technical solutions. Simultaneously, Semyon Mikhailovich did not forget about his beloved cavalry. At his initiative, the famous Special Cavalry Corps was created, an elite formation that became a laboratory of new ideas in the field of cavalry combat. The country's best cavalrymen served there, and new models of weapons and equipment for cavalry were tested there. The Corps became a kind of bridge between the traditional cavalry of the past and the mechanized formations of the future. The 1930s became one of the darkest periods in Soviet history. The wave of repressions that swept the country did not bypass the Red Army. One after another, outstanding military commanders disappeared into the depths of the NKVD. Tukhachevsky, Yakir, Uborevich, Kork, Primakov. People with whom Budyonny had fought shoulder to shoulder on the fronts of the Civil War suddenly turned out to be enemies of the people. In this atmosphere of universal fear and suspicion, Semyon Mikhailovich managed not only to survive, but also to maintain his position in the highest military hierarchy. What helped him survive when many of his comrades perished? First and foremost, his special relationship with Stalin. Their acquaintance began during the Civil War, when Joseph Vissarionovich was a member of the Revolutionary Military Council of the Southern Front. Together, they experienced the dramatic moments of the defense of Tsaritsyn, the Polish campaign, and the struggle against Wrangel. A relationship developed between them that could be called, if not friendly, then trusting. Stalin valued several qualities in Budyonny: unconditional personal loyalty, lack of political ambition, and, significantly, correct social origin. A native of a poor peasant family, Semyon Mikhailovich embodied the type of Soviet military leader who was ideologically close to the leader. Unlike many other commanders, Budyonny was never noted for opposition activities. He supported neither Trotsky nor other political opponents of Stalin. This position, dictated either by natural caution or by a sincere belief in the correctness of Stalin's course, saved his life. When arrests began in the army, Budyonny faced a difficult moral choice. Many of the accused were his comrades in arms, people he knew well and with whom he had gone through the crucible of war. How did he act in this situation? According to contemporaries, Semyon Mikhailovich did not show any particular zeal in exposing, quote, but he also did not openly defend them. He took a position that today would be called neutral. He did not join the chorus of accusers, but he also did not risk his position to save his comrades. The story with Tukhachevsky is indicative. When the famous marshal was arrested, Budyonny did not publicly condemn his colleague, as many did. But he also did not try to intercede for him before Stalin. At the infamous meeting of the Military Council under the People's Commissar of Defense, where the case of the military was discussed, Budyonny spoke reservedly, without accusatory pathos. This cautious line of conduct allowed him to avoid suspicions of sympathy for the conspirators. An important factor in Budyonny's survival was his image in the public consciousness. For millions of Soviet people, he was a hero of the Civil War, a legendary army commander whose exploits were glorified in songs and poems. This popular authority made him a figure of special significance for the regime. Destroying a symbol man who embodied revolutionary romanticism would have been too risky even for Stalin. The repressions did not bypass Budyonny's immediate circle. Many commanders of the First Cavalry Army were arrested and shot, including such outstanding cavalrymen as Dyumenko and Mironov. Semyon Mikhailovich could not help but worry about the fate of his comrades in arms, but outwardly he remained calm and loyal. This ability to separate personal feelings from state necessity, as it was understood at the time, helped him get through the terrible years of terror. The year 37 brought Budyonny not only trials but also new honors. He was appointed commander of the Moscow Military District, a position of strategic importance, indicating Stalin's high trust. During a period when the army lost a significant part of its command personnel, Budyonny's experience and authority were especially valuable to the country's leadership. In 1939, Semyon Mikhailovich received the rank of Marshal of the Soviet Union, becoming one of the first holders of this highest military rank. This was not only a recognition of his merits, but also an indication that his position in the military hierarchy remained unshakable, despite all the storms of repression. On June 22, 1941, a new era began for Semyon Mikhailovich Budyonny, as it did for the entire country. The Great Patriotic War became a test not only for the Soviet people, but also for the military doctrine that Soviet military leaders had built for decades. The legendary Marshal, a hero of the Civil War, now had to prove his worth in completely different conditions, in the age of tanks, aviation, and motorized formations. From the first days of the war, Budyonny was included in the Stavka of the Supreme High Command, the highest body of strategic leadership of the armed forces. This appointment underscored the special trust Stalin still placed in his old comrade. However, Semyon Mikhailovich soon had to move from staff work to direct command of troops. In July 1941, as German tank wedges rapidly advanced deep into Soviet territory, Budyonny was appointed commander of the southwestern direction. Under his command were the southwestern and southern fronts, a vast territory from Polesiye to the Black Sea. The task set before the marshal was almost impossible: to stop the enemy's advance, having at his disposal weakened, often disorganized troops, experiencing a severe shortage of ammunition, fuel, and communications equipment. In these most difficult conditions, both Budyonny's strengths and weaknesses as a military leader became apparent. On the one hand, his colossal combat experience, personal bravery, and authority among soldiers helped maintain the morale of the troops. The marshal often appeared at the front lines, personally directing individual operations, inspiring soldiers with his presence. On the other hand, he lacked experience in managing large mechanized formations in modern warfare. Events developed particularly dramatically in the Kiev area. Budyonny's troops were threatened with encirclement when enemy tank groups enveloped them from the flanks. The marshal repeatedly appealed to the Stavka for permission to withdraw troops to the eastern bank of the Dnieper to avoid catastrophe. However, Stalin, who considered Kiev a strategically important point, categorically forbade retreat. As a result, a significant part of the southwestern front found itself in a cauldron. More than 600,000 Soviet soldiers and officers were captured or killed. This was one of the most severe defeats of the Red Army throughout the war. After the Kiev catastrophe, Budyonny was relieved of his post as commander of the direction and replaced by Marshal Timoshenko. Many historians blame Budyonny for this defeat, pointing to his adherence to outdated methods of warfare. However, in fairness, it should be noted that the marshal acted within the strict framework set by the Stavka, and his proposals for withdrawing troops from under attack were rejected by the High Command. After the Kiev failure, Budyonny's career as a frontline commander effectively ended. However, he was not removed from participation in the war. In September 1941, Semyon Mikhailovich was appointed commander of the Reserve Front, and then transferred to the post of Commander-in-Chief of the troops of the North Caucasian direction. Semyon Mikhailovich Budyonny's legacy extends far beyond his personal military biography. This legendary army commander, who rose from a simple peasant to a marshal, left a deep mark on the development of military science and practice. His ideas and methods, born in the crucible of the Civil War, were further developed in Soviet military doctrine and largely remain relevant even in modern conditions. So what constitutes the essence of Budyonny's military legacy? First and foremost, an understanding of the importance of mobility on the battlefield. Long before the era of tank wedges and airborne operations, Semyon Mikhailovich proved that speed and maneuver can compensate for a lack of firepower and numbers. His cavalry raids deep into enemy territory became the prototype for the deep tank breakthroughs of World War II. It is no coincidence that Soviet tank corps and armies were created taking into account the experience of the First Cavalry Army. Many commanders of mechanized formations began their careers under Budyonny's leadership and transferred his tactical methods into a new era. Another crucial element of Budyonny's legacy was his understanding of the psychological factor in combat. Semyon Mikhailovich intuitively felt that the morale of troops often proved decisive. He knew how to inspire soldiers by personal example, creating an atmosphere of confidence in victory. These principles formed the basis of Soviet military psychology, which paid enormous attention to the moral and political training of soldiers. Budyonny also made a significant contribution to the development of the theory of surprise. His cavalry units appeared where the enemy least expected them, striking at the most vulnerable points. This principle was subsequently developed in Soviet operational doctrine, which envisioned achieving strategic and tactical surprise as one of the key factors for victory. Budyonny's experience in organizing the interaction of various branches of service was of particular importance. The First Cavalry Army was never a purely cavalry formation. It included artillery batteries, armored detachments, and aviation units. Semyon Mikhailovich was one of the first to understand the need for the comprehensive application of all available means of combat. This approach was developed in the theory of combined arms warfare, which became the basis of Soviet military science. Budyonny's ideas about centralized command and control, combined with initiative at the local level, were reflected in the concept of single command with a certain degree of freedom of action granted to commanders at all levels. This approach allowed for combining firm leadership with flexibility and adaptability at the tactical level. Budyonny's legacy underwent a serious test during the Great Patriotic War. Many of his students and followers became outstanding military leaders: Zhukov, Rokossovsky, Konev. They creatively developed their teachers' ideas, adapting them to the conditions of modern warfare. The mechanized corps, created based on the experience of the First Cavalry Army, played a decisive role in the defeat of the German fascist troops. The influence of Budyonny's school was particularly evident in operations such as the Battle of Stalingrad and the Battle of Kursk, where mastery of maneuver, surprise, and concentration of forces in the direction of the main attack brought victory to Soviet arms. In the post-war period, Budyonny's military legacy was reinterpreted, taking into account the experience of World War II. His ideas about mobile formations were further developed in the creation of tank and mechanized armies capable of rapid breakthroughs and deep encirclements. The concept of airborne troops also largely relied on the experience of cavalry raids during the Civil War. Modern military theorists analyzing Budyonny's legacy note his remarkable intuition, which allowed him to anticipate many trends in the development of military affairs. His understanding of the role of mobile forces, the importance of surprise, and the moral factor remains relevant even in the era of high-tech warfare. Even in the age of digital technologies and precision weapons, the basic principles of military art that Semyon Mikhailovich followed retain their value. Behind the legendary image of the marshal with the dashingly twisted mustache lay a living person with his own habits, predilections, and weaknesses. What was Semyon Budyonny like outside of official portraits and biographies? First and foremost, contemporaries noted his astonishing simplicity in communication. Despite high ranks and positions, he never lost touch with the people from whom he came. The marshal could easily chat with a common Red Army soldier, inquire about life, family, and problems. This humanity attracted people to him and created a special atmosphere of trust. Budyonny had an excellent sense of humor, loved a well-placed folk word, and often used proverbs and sayings. In a close circle, he might tell an amusing story from front-line life, laughing at himself. At the same time, he categorically did not tolerate vulgarity and rudeness towards women. Horses remained the passion of Semyon Mikhailovich's life. Even after becoming a marshal, he found time for horseback riding daily. At his estate near Moscow, Budyonny established a stud farm where he bred a new horse breed named Budyonovskaya. These strong, hardy horses, combining the best qualities of Don and thoroughbred riding breeds, became a true pride of Soviet horse breeding. Few know that the marshal was a talented, self-taught musician. He masterfully played the accordion and balalaika, knowing many folk songs. In rare moments of rest, Budyonny could pick up an instrument and delight friends with a soulful melody. He particularly loved Cossack songs, which reminded him of his native Don. An interesting character trait of the legendary commander was his passion for cleanliness and order. Even in the field conditions of the Civil War, he found opportunities to shave and tidy himself up. Budyonny's famous mustache was always meticulously twirled, his boots polished to a shine, and his uniform looked impeccable. He maintained this habit throughout his life. In everyday life, Semyon Mikhailovich was unpretentious and modest. Despite his high position, he did not strive for luxury. His apartment in Moscow was furnished simply, without excesses. Books served as the main decoration. Budyonny read a lot, especially historical and military literature, striving to fill gaps in his education. The marshal was a gracious host and a hospitable person. His house often gathered comrades in arms who reminisced about their experiences and sang songs. At the table, Budyonny preferred simple home-cooked food: borscht, porridge, fried potatoes with lard. Among drinks, he respected good vodka but drank moderately and did not tolerate drunkenness. Budyonny's relationships with women were not simple. He was married 3 times. His first wife, Nadezhda Ivanovna, shared the hardships of the Civil War with him, but the marriage broke down in the 1920s. His second wife was opera singer Olga Mikhailova, a beauty who captivated the heart of the renowned Marshal. However, this union also proved short-lived. His third wife, Maria Vasilievna, was 30 years younger than Budyonny. She bore him 3 children and remained by his side until the end of his days. As a father, Semyon Mikhailovich was strict but fair. He made no allowances for his children, demanding diligence and honesty from them. At the same time, he found time to communicate with them, taught them horseback riding, and instilled a love for nature and animals. His children recalled that their father never raised his voice at them, preferring to persuade rather than command. The image of Semyon Budyonny in Soviet culture was formed over decades, gradually transforming from a real person into a mythological hero. His colorful appearance with lush mustaches, simple peasant origins, and brilliant victories in the Civil War made the Marshal an ideal symbol of the revolutionary era. Folk songs, poems, paintings, and films created the image of an invincible commander, a dashing swordsman, the embodiment of the popular spirit. Isaac Babel's famous Vsevolod Vishnevsky's First Cavalry and Mitrofan Grekov's paintings. All these works reinforced the heroic myth of Budyonny and his cavalrymen. A special role was played by the popular song with its memorable chorus. This song became the unofficial anthem not only of the Red Cavalry, but of the entire Red Army. In Soviet times, Budyonny's name was given to streets, squares, and collective farms. His image was used in the patriotic upbringing of youth as an example of selfless service to the motherland. Even the breed of horses developed with his participation was named Budyonny. However, behind this ceremonial facade lay a much more complex and contradictory figure. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the assessment of Budyonny's personality and activities began to change. Historians gained access to previously secret archives, and new testimonies and memoirs appeared. The image of the infallible hero gradually began to crumble, giving way to a more objective view. In the 90s, the pendulum of public opinion swung in the opposite direction. Budyonny was portrayed as an uneducated swordsman who accidentally found himself at the top of the military hierarchy. He was blamed for all the failures of the Red Army in the initial period of the Great Patriotic War, accused of dogmatism and inability to adapt to modern combat conditions. At this time, publications appeared that presented him as a passive executor of Stalin's will, an accomplice in the repressions in the army. However, emotional assessments gradually gave way to a more balanced analysis. Modern historians strive to avoid extremes, considering Budyonny in the context of his era, taking into account all the circumstances of his life and activities. What kind of figure does Semyon Mikhailovich appear to be in light of today's knowledge? First of all, he was a man of his time, with all its contradictions and limitations. A man from the lower classes who, thanks to natural talent, perseverance, and a fortunate turn of events, rose to the top of the military hierarchy. Budyonny was not a military theorist on the level of Tukhachevsky or Triandafilov, but he possessed excellent tactical intuition, the ability to find and exploit the enemy's weaknesses. His main achievement remains the creation of the First Cavalry Army, a unique military formation that played a decisive role in the Civil War. Budyonny managed to unite disparate cavalry detachments into a powerful fist capable of solving strategic tasks. This demonstrated his undeniable organizational talent. It is more difficult to assess Budyonny's role during the repressions in the army. On the one hand, he did not come to the defense of his repressed comrades. On the other hand, he himself was under constant threat and could hardly have changed the course of events. His position was typical for many military leaders of that time: silent acceptance of what was happening as an inevitable evil. During the Great Patriotic War, Budyonny showed himself to be ambiguous. His actions as commander of the Southwest Direction are criticized, but one cannot forget that he acted under extremely difficult conditions, with strict limitations from the Stavka. Later, in other positions, the Marshal brought considerable benefit, especially in organizing cavalry units and training reserves.